struggle through a post-merger integration when you can glide through it? Why deal with the PMI integration challenges when you can overcome them even before they occur? Why move slow when you can move at pace? What are the world's leading PMI experts doing right now to achieve profit-accelerating integrations? This podcast will give you all the answers to these questions and many more. My name is Dudley Peacock, and welcome to the 100 Days and Beyond podcast. And welcome everyone to 100 Days and Beyond, the podcast that's dedicated to M&A, to mergers and acquisitions, post-merger integration, and really all the things that happen around there. We've had so many guests up to this point with varying degrees of background and understanding of the way the world works. We've had people that do the M&A work. We've had people that do the integration work. We have had people on the receiving end of a target of an acquisition, and we've had people from so many different industries, from the sort of more, I would say, traditional industries, and we've even had people from cannabis and other sort of more non-traditional industries, which has made a really, really good show this far. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We have absolutely an accomplished individual this morning, and I want to say thank you to John Farrell for joining us. Good morning, John.
Morning, Dudley. How are you? You okay?
Yeah, very good, very good. Thank you. All nice and bright and sunny in the land of the grey sky. We have no grey skies, and what's great about the UK right now is that I don't know, it's just damn hot.
It is hot. It is hot. I mean, we're expecting 40 degrees today. So yeah, it's got interesting news stories later on, I dare say, this evening. So, yeah.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, I spoke to a few people from Australia this morning, just as a side note, and they're saying, "Oh, but we regularly get that." I mean, I know, what's this red alert warning stuff? I mean, that's like a normal summer's day. I mean.
Yeah, exactly. I operated in Australia for a while, and we had some large scale sort of engineering and infrastructure works in Australia, and yeah, quite interesting. We're not used to it here. It's quite a rare event, obviously, but I think the infrastructure in Australia is well set up for it. It's all of the heat warnings and getting to the shade at 32 degrees, and sites stop working at 35 degrees, and there's an awful lot of expectation there. People know the rules and so on. Here, it's a lot more difficult. Therefore, I think we got ourselves into a bit of, I would say, a sticky situation.
So. Literally, if you're on the tubes right now, I think that'll be pretty sticky. So yeah. So let's get to the episode. John, thank you very much, and I think it's an appropriate way to start because you do come from that. I would say the construction background and so on. So I'm going to read your profile briefly, just to introduce you to the audience. You're executive director. In your profile, you talk about growth, M&A, and turnaround. Now, turnaround is a very special and unique environment. And when you're doing M&As, and often M&A is about buying entities that you want to, let's say, buy, build, and fix and exit kind of thing, in a broad term. But turnaround is a little more tricky, and we can maybe touch on that. But let me just read your profile quickly. So, accomplished business leader, executive director with large multidisciplinary contracting organizations. Okay, so I mean, that's very interesting because the contracting environment is really it's an interesting environment because it's fraught with contracts, and it's fraught with, in other words, delivery, and it's all services, and very, very often things do go wrong, and it'd be great to get your view on that. Proven success in business growth, M&A, turnaround, profit improvement, and value release in high-paced environments across sectors including M&E, utilities and energy, construction, FM. There's a lot of acronyms, so we're going to have to touch on what those mean. and then government services, extensive experience in securing significant growth in long-term framework and major project opportunities from bid through to successful delivery. And that's very interesting because from an integration point of view, I mean, if I'm buying an entity, that's really good at delivering on projects. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, okay, that's all fair and well. We're buying an entity that has traditionally potentially won contracts through bids, etc., and delivered on them. Where's the value? Is the value in the people? Is the value in the systems, the processes? Is the value in the brand? Is it in the connection? Is it in the ability to have the right kind of talent on board? There's so much to talk about around there. You talk about being a consistent advocate in the creation and ongoing development of high-performing teams and individuals to drive success. Most recently led the turnaround, transformation, and successful subsequent, and this is really interesting, carve-out of the SSE contracting and SSE electricity solutions from the FTSE-listed SSE PLC. Please remind me, we've got to talk about that, because carve-outs for me are fascinating. And I think from the way the world is going, there are often a lot of regulatory reasons why you would carve out and so on. And maybe just for the audience sake, we'll touch on what a carve out really means. How does it actually work? And so on. And how does it differ from, from a normal integration and so on? Let's carry on. So now positioned as one of the top 5 M&E contracting organizations. This is SSE PLC, I'm guessing. Organization in the UK and Ireland, engaged as a group COO for international events, group arena, transitioning from private equity ownership to successful IPO and listing on AIM. So AIM listings may or may not work out. I mean, they are very interesting in terms of their ability to either pay off handsomely or get the exiting people stuck. Yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting one as well. So we've got a ton to talk about today.
Yeah, that business has flipped back around as well, Dudley. It's actually bought itself back out, MBO'd off the AIM, and with private equity backing, and it's back in private ownership. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's interesting, how it goes backwards and forwards. I mean, that's interesting. Yeah. Let's cover that. I want to sort of finish your profile. Oversaw the merger and acquisition projects for leading utility infrastructure group Morrison Utilities, supported by their North American private equity investors. A former member of the executive team of Amy, and you'll have to tell us who that is, following the acquisition and integration of Enterprise and Ferrovile. So I think let's start. Let's just start with who is John? Who's John Farrell?
Our profile was so long, Dudley. I think I need to cut that back a bit, to be honest with you.
In fact, it is absolutely brilliant. I think from a profile point of view and from the kind of background that's really valuable for audience and for the guys and the girls that listen to this type of podcast. They want to hear from experienced people that have been in the trenches, and I think you probably, you really fit that profile quite nicely. So, and you've got quite a broad, I think you call it multidisciplinary. I think it's really a good broad background. But let's start at the beginning. Tell us your story. How did you get into this stuff, and sort of how did you work your way into all this complexity?
I know it's well, I'll try and make the story a lot less than the profile, actually. So I've come to the ranks in operational roles and in large scale infrastructure businesses, in utilities and so on. I suppose that every aspect of what I did in the past was always focused around people, large projects, big contracts, and big customers, big delivery for big customers such as National Grid, and big utility businesses. And focus on those types of operations, Dudley, allowed me to get and in the businesses that I was in, allowed me to get a real broad spectrum of how businesses operate, all the way from frontline delivery, the whole way through to managing P&Ls and eventually into mergers and acquisitions, because a lot of the businesses that I was involved with, whilst we were doing turnarounds, it was quite clear that some of those turnarounds were required because previous acquisitions, and they were stranded. Previous acquisitions had not been properly integrated. And I was lucky enough to be part of businesses such as Enterprise PLC back in the day when they were hugely acquisitive. and actually specialized in targeting and acquiring distressed assets and distressed businesses. So those distressed businesses, there were a lot of great businesses that were brought in, but some businesses that needed to be put in intensive care, some businesses that needed to be just needed some fine tuning. But the common theme around a lot of those areas was people, and large scale operations, multi depot operations, and the complexity and the actual the nuances as well around bringing people on board, getting people bought into a plan, setting up target operating models was quite common. They're all quite common themes in everything that we were doing. So I was part of the enterprise group. I'd previously been a managing director in the big fleet business. And as enterprise was acquired by Ferrovial, we had a fairly large scale government services section. So did Amy, and we were integrated into Amy. So I was eventually part of that team in the exec team of the local government part of Amy, that had to execute plans for the integration of one of the largest businesses that they'd ever acquired, forming a almost over £1 billion business turnover-wise, with multiple local government and central government customers across the UK. And that in itself was huge. That was a huge task. And I suppose you mentioned earlier on that was, part of you mentioned people that had been on the receiving end of an integration. You mentioned people who'd been actually on what I would call fairly senior in the relationship. And there is always a seniority in the relationship, for OBL Board's enterprise, they were merging it and with Amy. So of course we went through all of the post-deal and post-financial close. We went through almost 18 months of transition, bringing to bear through a full-scale separation office, how the businesses will be integrated. Well, what people lose sight of is you've got these fantastic plans, you've got these fantastic programs, all these multiple facets, from procurement through to health and safety, through to finance. What ERP system are you going to use? All those great things. They all, if you're not careful, can take part of your customer and take your eye off actually bringing the people with you on the journey. So what I then found was that in amongst that, we had some problematic contracts, we had some problematic areas of the business. I suppose I was almost like called St. Jude. I was the patron saint of some of the lost causes, I would say. But I had a penchant for turning them around. And a lot of that was around getting a plan in place that people could buy into, people could believe in, getting your customer back on track, getting your customer back aligned, getting your contract back aligned. And a lot of this, though, was there were common themes, and I realized that in amongst what I'd see, though, those common themes were people, customers, and making sure that the integration model and making sure that your target operating model is properly communicated, is properly thought out. And these are great, even now when we're talking about it, you do come across problems, but integrations only go so far. A business will normally say, look, we've got 18 months to integrate this business, and that's it. Then we've gone to the next acquisition or the next target. And you end up with a whole raft of stranded parts of those businesses, and stranded people, stranded customers. And the business has changed and moved on. And if you're not careful, depending on what your integration plan is, some people bring businesses in and plug them into the business and leave them standalone. That's a big strategy for N Group, which is Morrison Utilities, and they are a highly acquisitive business at the moment. Other businesses integrate them effectively and try and realize synergies wherever possible. But in amongst all of that, those plans and executing those plans and bringing people on board with it is absolutely critical. If you don't get that right, then you will end up with a bit of a mess at the end of it. And that might not manifest itself for 2 years down the line. When you start seeing your target, you start seeing a business that you've spent an awful lot of time and money acquiring, not meeting expectations, not delivering the top line because customers have gone somewhere else whilst you've been distracted, or your people and your skill sets have disappeared. And so, and then I went into doing some stuff for myself. I set up a bit of a practice, and we looked at doing stuff with Arena Group and doing stuff with M Group, with First Reserve and so on. And then I went into SSE. And the interesting part of SSE was that SSE had been hugely acquisitive over the last sort of 15 years. SSE is a huge energy provider. They're involved in every aspect of energy provision, all the way from generation, transmission, distribution, all the way through to retail and so on, where they were until recently. They had a program of divestment so they could focus on their core investment activity, which was renewables. And that meant that areas such as the contracting arm that they had, areas such as their telecoms arm, they were looking to dispose of and looking to divest. And we had a quite successful program. So we looked at contracting business, which was, again, a series of smaller areas that had been left a little bit stranded after a wholesale sort of acquisition drive that SSE had taken. And we brought that together. It's myself and a team of individuals. We came together and brought that together into SSE contracting and did a business turnaround, and then effectively managed, and I was part of the management team that effectively led the carve out and set that business up on its own, which is a wholly different scenario. So that's briefly the history and some of the obstacles, that we find along the way. I dare say some of your listeners and watchers will find some common themes in what we talk about over the next while.
Yeah, absolutely. Just thinking about the, it appears to me sometimes there are opposing dynamic. There's opposing dynamic at work when it comes to the strategy is to acquire, but I've acquired a lot of these things and they should just sort of happen by themselves. They must just work while I go and acquire new ones. And then it's sort of teams like yourself that have to go and say, okay, let's do a bit of a sweep up exercise. Let's try and bring these things together. Because I think it's very tempting for big companies and larger company CEOs to get into this. Some people call it deal heat, where, who's the next thing I'm going to buy? Or what am I going to do? But sometimes it becomes more emotional than rational. And then there's the question about, are we really rational human beings? And that's another conversation on its own. But coming back to your the contracting organizations, I want to let's flesh that out to a certain extent, because many of these types of organizations and utilities and energy instruction, etc., they're made up not necessarily of selling widgets. I mean, they're not made up. I mean, you were MD of a logistics company, so you understand what it is to fulfill or move widgets. But when you're doing contracting and or services and utilities and that sort of thing, many times it's more about the infrastructure, more about the other stuff that happens around. Just tell us a little bit about that in terms of what your experience on that.
Well, if you look at the businesses that we're talking about, even go back into the likes of the Interserves, Sercos, Carillions, various others, a lot of businesses have started off as construction businesses. So they've got big scale projects. You look at like Solano, Rourke, and various others. And that flows into utilities as well. There are businesses that have specialisms in large scale capital projects for big utility customers, big infrastructure. But then when you're looking at the value of a business, the value of that business is around its long-term customer relationships, but also its longer-term contracts. So it's always alongside that, you have contracts that are 5 years, 7 years, where you're actually maintaining the assets for those customers as well. So you go through the whole raft of design, build, sometimes operating those assets for them as well. Yeah, if you're a network operator or running a private network for we'll say an airport, and maintaining those assets. So maintaining is a good example, actually, of maintaining an airport's infrastructure for a private customer, where within the while, all of those utilities are owned by the airport and have to be run by the airport. So those contracting entities have got all of those gamut of service provision from, capital, infrastructure, build, all the way through to maintenance of the networks, and then into what I would call asset management and asset ownership, where moving up, and it's always the desire of businesses such as this to move themselves up the value chain and improve the valuation of their business. So moving up into being an asset management business, that's a totally different side of things altogether, where you're actually in partnership. And there's always a lot of terminology around partnering in construction and partnering in utilities and so on. It can be quite a, sometimes it's a distorted partnership, because you are always going to try and please your customer. Yeah. So the dynamic is always slightly shifting. Yeah. Like any good marriage. So that's in general what happens. And what you see is that in a good example of this is in contracting organizations that have got long-term contracts. The people who've been delivering a contract, for example, this is happens in local government as well. So a contracting organization will win a piece of work for a client that could be 5, 6, 7 years. Yeah. That might depend on the asset investment cycle that was a water business or electricity business or a gas business actually has, from the regulator. So let's say it's a 5-year investment cycle. You bring a workforce. If you win that contract from another competitor, the workforce moves across to you under 2P. So you're introducing change, and you're introducing change to a workforce who've been, probably through 3 or 4 different, I would say, versions of outsourcing with different businesses. It's not unusual to take on a contract where a workforce has been working for the same customer for something for 20 years, but they've actually been engaged by 4 different contracting outfits and organizations on the way through. Yeah. And that then brings in the change aspect. So lots of people used to ask me, well, why is it, these contractors are losing money when people, or why do they need turnaround? Why are they not delivering or whatever? Well, if you're going in cheaper than your competitors and you're knocking £1 million off the price, well, you go back and you're doing exactly the same thing that's always been done. It's not rocket science to say that you're going to lose £1 million. So you've got to change. If you're changing the delivery model and you agreed that with your customer, you've got to bring the people alongside with that, because otherwise they'll just carry on what they've always been doing. And the other aspect of that is that as you bring these workforces, if you're a business that's got a lot of these contracts, and as you bring workforces in and out of your business, so you'll have maybe, let's say, a contract down in London for a local authority doing environmental services, that could have 250 people. So in 5 years' time, either that 250 people will stay on because you renew the contract, or they will leave your business and move off to another contractor. So if you've got that cycle continuously running through your business, if you're not careful and you're not continuously educating your people around what your target operating model looks like, what your business is doing to change, how your business is moving forward with innovation, new IT systems, everything else, if you're not continuously educating those people, within 5 years, you end up with a cohort of people who do not know how to transact in your business. Yeah. So if you take that dynamic and then marry that alongside, we're going to be highly acquisitive, and we're going to bring a similar target organization into our organization, and they're going through exactly the same thing. Yeah. It stands to reason that if you don't plan this effectively and if you don't focus on bringing the people through change, then you're going to end up in a heap. Yeah, technical term, that. But, you are going to end up with people who don't know how to transact. I saw one business that changed its ERP system, was hugely nervous about the whole thing, set the whole ERP system up. Right? I remember giving some advice through this with Hitachi Consulting. And, not all ERP systems are made equal. There are certain ones that suit certain businesses better than others. But if you're looking at the implementation of something like that, people start coming up with exactly the same issues. It's the same common themes as you move through. And there is a thread here that flows into contract management, flows into 2P, flows into contract growth and organic growth. Like I just said there, through a lot of those contract turnarounds, but also into the M&A world. And that common theme really is making sure that your people are properly trained and educated in your systems on the way through. I can't, it's difficult in today's day and age with a lot of remote working. It's really, really difficult sometimes to onboard people. Well, you imagine onboarding 500, 1,000 people for a target business, a target organization. And, never mind, in the middle of that, they're also onboarding people because they've just won 3 or 4 contracts. And those people are coming in. So you've got this continuous cycle of change. Yeah. And you've got to create a line through that. You really do have to create the communication side of things is key. When I was talking about the ERP systems, the common theme there is, if you set it up in a way that it's all driven by your finance reporting. Yeah. Because let's face it, when you're in a private equity environment and when you're in an M&A environment, the first thing that has to be right is your reporting up through your investors. Yeah. No matter what sort of backing you've got, be it listed or whatever, that tends to drive people to set up their ERP systems in such a way that it is constructed for the reporting side of things. If you're not careful, then it's not reflecting the actual activity you've got going out on the ground. Yeah. So as an operator who's come up through different areas of different businesses, I recognized a lot of this happening. I saw a lot of this happening, and that meant that I was able to formulate plans and have been able to formulate plans in businesses, recognize those risks to be avoided. Yeah. Set your finance system to collect the data on your operations, and that will allow you to pay and get paid. Yeah. You do it the other way around, never get the right data to actually impact your productivity and impact your operations. So you've got to be very, very careful with the dynamic when you set out and the actual language even that you use in your business when you're engaging in this and setting up on these journeys. So that whole aspect of bringing people along that journey is all about the leadership. And you mentioned there earlier on about creating highly effective teams. And somebody said to me before, what makes a good program, a good sort of separation program or integration program. And it is actually around setting up a plan and your target operating model and so on, making sure it's communicated, but making sure everybody has been involved with that on the way through. It doesn't always work that way. I know that. But the more that you can bring people with you, the more that you can set up a team that become advocates for change and become advocates for that program and are driving that out in the business, then the more you can do that, then the more effective your program will be. And your post-deal integration, or whichever way you're setting it up, will be that much more effective. So, and then you've got to bring the target organization on board. So it's an interesting journey. All of these projects bring their own nuances and their own challenges, and particularly when you're buying distressed assets, because actually you're starting from a point that is behind the curve already. But they're exciting because there's always opportunity there. There's great opportunities to do something a little bit different.
Yeah, there is, and if I look at across this kind of landscape, the companies that that have got the ability not just to do the construction side of things, which is it's sort of a feast and famine environment, isn't it? You get a really good project, you put the whole team together, you do all of that type of thing, and then when the project nears its end, you now have built within that group of people, you've built amongst the talent, but you've also built systems, processes, procedures. You've done a whole lot of really good things. So you've got a whole lot of intellectual property that you've built over the period of time. Then the biggest sort of challenge, I think, would be for an entity like that then to win the next contract, to continue the use of that intellectual property that you've built up and so on. But if you've got a distressed environment, and then if you go into an M&A, you cannot often look at the historic to determine the future of an entity. And now you get given that as I almost want to say a bit of a curveball in terms of an integration practitioner, because you got shifting environments, because contracts could be coming to an end. You talk about distressed businesses. Distressed in construction for me means something different to an engineering firm or a pharma firm, because distress, I mean, maybe you just want to expand on this, but for me, distress in construction often happens because they've run out of contracts, or they've run to the end of a lot of contracts and they haven't managed to pick up new contracts, or the kind of arrangements they've had, sort of this buy, build and own, or buy, build and manage concept. You obviously want to, when you acquire, you want to buy one of these entities that have potentially gone through all the teething pains of the initial sort of setup, but are getting closer to the sort of the finishing the build and own part, because now you got more predictable income. I'm just throwing it out there in terms of that sort of that sort of business model. So just, I don't know if you want to expand on that, and just maybe bring on a few examples around that.
I suppose, yeah, you're right. I mean, the distressed side of things can be 2 or 3 different aspects, and you know, you try your best for them not all to happen at once. So I might have problematic contracts and projects that are either not delivering for a customer, behind schedule, or in dispute, or really have been bid far too keen, or the terrain has changed, and either commercially or operationally are not meeting expectations from a financial perspective and so on. So too many of those in the portfolio of a business can completely distract the management team and distract the management team away from top line growth. And that's what you tend to see. So you start getting this sort of this cycle where distraction of some of these projects takes people away from actually running the business, making improvements in the business itself, because they're so focused on contracts and the underperforming areas of the business, and that takes up all their time and focus as a management team. So then you take what you mentioned there around top line. Great. I mean, it's absolutely key that if you're a project-based business, that you've got a pipeline of project activity that you can move your expertise or move your people around into. That means relationships, that means decent CRM systems, that means that all of your business development side of things has to be really key at keeping an eye on the market and making sure that you're involved with the right type of bidding activity. And you're investing your time and your efforts and your resources in the business in the right way. So you're quite right when you get that situation, Dudley, where you're bringing on a business and you're bolting on and building your business. You let your governance structures in your existing business and governance structures in the target acquisition or the target, and bringing them on board and bringing them together. The change that might be to a management team, which says, look, we're not quite happy that you're operating in this sort of a market, in this market over here, which is, let's call it residential or whatever. We think that's high risk. We're going to change. We're going to do something a little bit different. So you've got that target organization that has to turn itself a little bit on its axis. So, well, okay, that means we're not going to focus on that sort of market over there. We're going to focus over here on this market, which might have a completely different risk profile. So that means that you're changing the business. You're changing the dynamic of the business. To your point, that continuous organic growth, if you change the dynamic of the business and start reducing the turnover of the projects that you're aimed at, you've got to run twice as fast. Yeah. So it's all of this stuff starts impacting the dynamic of the commerciality of P&L, all of those aspects of how you're structured, everything else. And so when you're doing due diligence on a business and when you're looking at how that's going to fit into your own business, it's really, really important to be looking at that due diligence, not just from the perspective of how can we impact the valuation of the business, how can we impact the synergy savings or whatever we might see moving forward, but more and more important, what is the risk profile of that business? How does it fit into our existing risk profile? How does it fit into the risk profile and the appetite of the investors? And what does that mean then for what that business has to do to change and how it's going to impact its organic growth, particularly with customers? I mean, from a yield management perspective, one of the things that I did one business was took a portfolio of customers that were in local authorities and we withdrew ourselves from contracts that were not profitable because we could see that cycle. We could see that to make it profitable, the actions that we're going to have to undertake for those contracts we're going to mean that we're going to end up in dispute with the customer. Yeah. So you have to really be honest and make sure that you did it honest with yourselves with regards to how that business is going to impact your core business. We saw some of that in enterprise. There were projects that we'd undertaken that were distressed. They were in intensive care unit, but some we turned around, others we exited, and others because the Amy model was a little bit different. Actually, Amy's influence on those improved them all to the better. So that was a good example of where the dynamic of a new business bringing an emerger there could change the aspect of what you're doing with your customers and what you're doing, particularly with your pipeline, the type of work that you're going to bid. So, that's for me, that there's not enough of that due diligence and that thought process undertaken with regards to strategically what that is going to look like in 3 to 4 years. Yeah. Now, because like you just said there earlier on, we've all experienced this. I know what's the next acquisition. I know what's the next acquisition. If you've got an intense period of investment and a very active investor who is bolting on and building very, very quickly, you've got to be very careful. You've got to make sure that those acquisitions and those targets really fit into your business and fit into your risk profile. Either that, or as you said, post deal, it's up to people like myself to come in and start sweeping that up and changing it, and changing the shape of what you've got. And that's, it's important. You realize your value very early on. You've got to move quickly, release value from fair value, release, cash, release profit from fair value provisions if you can. All those different things that you've got to move ahead with. Get that really done really fast and quickly and stabilize the model. So sometimes it's right just to leave it a little bit longer to fix these things because they're not having a massive impact. But then you've got to fix them at some point. You really do. So, it's interesting. Every single one of you said, Dudley, is completely different. There's and I will say, further to the piece around the 5-year cycle of people. I remember one, I was on the receiving end of one, which was a huge, massive learning curve for me, where we were told that we were going to take the best of one operating model and the best of the other, with two massive businesses, clash them together and come up with this fantastic best way of doing business in the sector. And what we found it was that, we were changing everything for the target business. We were changing everything for host business. And that meant that everything was changing for everybody, something in the region of 2,500, 3,000 people. And once again, we were in a situation where, if we weren't careful, everything was changing for everybody all at once and nobody knew how to transact. Where do I go to get that signed off? How do I onboard which of these processes and procedures are we using today? How is that moving? How is that ERP system? Because the ERP system is one side of things, but all of your commercial processes and procedures and everything else have to be in place to actually support that in the first place. So you change everything. And within 12 to 18 months, we had to come back and unwind a lot of the, I would say, aspirational aspects of what we were trying to achieve. Yeah, it was, but we were able to do that. And then thankfully we were able to stabilize that situation and come out through the other end of it. But it's quite torrid.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the different stakeholders in contracting environments and construction, especially. Everything is about contracts and so on. And they often, when you get involved in an M&A environment, especially post M&A, post deal, when the deals have been negotiated, and as you mentioned, the impact is often how do I pay the lowest possible price for this acquisition, and how do I sort of theoretically get the value creation and the synergy and all that. Then you get guys like yourself that have to go and actually physically go and do it. But when the negotiations are happening, often it's only with the senior teams. You don't really get to get to engage with the, let's call it the guys at the coalface, the people doing the actual work. Let's call it the middle and lower management. So, and you don't necessarily get a view of the disputes and potential disputes. You know, those let's call it surprises that happen. So you have a contract carrying on, and there's a deliverable or one or two things that didn't quite go as planned. It's held up the project or portion of it or whatever it is. And now you've got, you the integration guy, you've got 3, 4, 5,000 people to take care of. You only sort of, probably generally, I would guess, not a massive team either. You've got this imminent dispute that's coming. If you don't handle it, I mean, it's pretty much firefighting if you think about it. There's a dispute coming. It could very well end up in court rapidly, which they sometimes do. And you got to try and protect the actual project, because if that goes wrong, it has this knock on a whole lot of unintended consequences. So as an integration practitioner in this space, it must be incredibly, I'm just thinking from a stress point of view, from a high high attention.
Yeah, I'm actually 25. I mean, you know.
I'm just throwing it out there because I think it must be one of the more stressful environments, because it's a shifting landscape, because you've got current projects, you've got existing customers that you may be managing. So you got to often these bigger entities especially have got multiple facets to it. It's not just, hey, we're a construction company, we win the next bid, we go and do it and we leave. Many of them get intertwined and becomes the spider web of interrelationships and etc. And then the one element which I haven't mentioned is on the financing side. So sometimes you have people that come in, if the customer's got their own money, that's one thing. But sometimes these projects could be co-funded by other entities, other individuals, other organizations. And now you got to report back, and let's just say there are many irons in the fire. And I just want to get your view on that, and then I want to talk a little bit about you personally. But just tell me how you cope with that in terms of stress levels and so on.
Well, it depends. You know, there is no perfect or one size fits all approach to this, but you tend to find that businesses that have got large contracting organizations have got their structures in place, lovely, you know, around how they're managing customers, how they're managing the commercial relationships. I suppose as you're moving through an acquisition, those discussions with customers and the key customers at a point through that process will take place. And it is sometimes seen by certain customers as an opportunity to either, you know, tell people how well it's going, how badly it's going, or whatever. So it's important on the way through that actually the discussions with a business's customer base are fairly robust. Yeah. And I think that's obviously part of the due diligence process. But as you say, as you get inside, there are projects and contracts and so on that as you're moving through your acquisition will look quite okay. You know, there's nothing wrong with it. But there could be a 2-year project, and, you know, 6 months down the line, some design change or some problem or some snag that you hit in the actual project itself impacts the financials of the project, and it turns a little bit sour. So you've got to do something different and innovative with your customer to turn that around and get it back on track. That's something that you can't get true visibility of through the diligence process and then through whatever warranties or whatever else are there, because these things are continuously moving. You know, that's the whole nature of a project such as that. It has traction. It moves on with milestones. So you have to look at the business's history of delivery, I think, and understand between that and the customers that they actually engage with, that business has decent delivery history and a history of delivering projects on time, profitably, safely, more than anything, and to the expectation and delighting the customer base. So bringing those customers with you, that's the key thing. Like I mentioned earlier on, 3 aspects, bring the people with you, deal with problems, deal with them early, but also make sure you're not distracted away and eroding the top line, because we can all do the yield management piece. We can all say, right, we've got customers that we can exit here because either the relationship or commercially it's not good. But growth within the existing customer base of these organizations, holding on to those customers, is far more valuable and far less time consuming and less resource heavy than actually bidding new customers and new work and so on. So maintaining your customer base is absolutely key. Those structures that are within the organization to do that, you have to approach your integration or approach your target or approach it in a way that really nurtures that. If you're not nurturing your business development team, it stands to reason that either A, you're not going to continue with your growth profile, but B, they're not going to stay with you, because if they can't see that you are invested in them delivering for you in certain markets and with certain customers, they're not going to earn their bonuses, they're not going to earn their commissions, they'll be off ski, they're off down the road. They're away to your competitors. And so much of this is people-based, and relationship-based. And the expertise as well. You could have people that have been with the business 5, 6 years, so longer, 10, 15 years, the SSE, for example, that what we've just done there, you're talking about people that have been with business 30 years. Yeah. Hugely technical business, fantastic people, with a huge amount of legacy and time invested in the business. So, explaining to them and bringing them on that journey and making sure that, because in those instances, you've got customers that will actually demand certain people on projects. Yeah. So, making sure that that is being looked after whilst you're doing the integration, whilst you're, delivering this plan is absolutely key. Now, in some instances, that's a case of, it's not broke, leave it alone. You guys carry on. Yeah. We'll all bring each other on the journey and make sure that that's okay. In other instances, like I mentioned, we might have to fine tune what's going on there, because the actual risk profile of some of the stuff that they're focused in on, or the markets that they're involved in, is we're changing the strategy, or the strategy is moving forward. So that's really important, making sure that the top level strategy, the reasons why you bought that business, the reasons why you acquired it, that they are maintained, communicated properly, but actually that you don't lose sight of those reasons why you bought that business in the first place. Yeah. All too often, I see businesses being bogged, as I call it. It's with the integration, and they lose their personality, and they lose the reason why you actually went for that business in the first place. And what you loved about that business, all of a sudden you see that it's disappeared because the people are gone, or you've changed something that has actually given it some irreparable damage. So to your point of how do you manage that dynamic? Well, it's actually key that you're engaged with every stakeholder in the business at a senior level. That stakeholder management, when you're moving through these programs, is absolutely fundamental, because it impacts every single aspect of the business. So those impact analysis, every time we do a program, a plan, we do impact analysis across every single aspect of the business, be that the operations, fleet, procurement, all of those areas. And I call it sort of, planning for the worst, but actually hoping to deliver the best, if you get my drift. And that's what you have to do. I'm a big fan of not being a pessimist. I'm a huge optimist. I've been accused of pumping far too much sunshine in the batch, which was a phrase that was used in one program and one project that I was involved with. But you have to approach this with the positives in mind, but also being mindful and planning for the risks to avoid in the first place, and making sure that everybody recognizes those traps that are there not to fall into. Yeah, and making sure that you've got those avoidance techniques and plans to get through it, around it, and under it. So yeah. It's interesting managing that dynamic. You're quite right. It can be quite nerve-wracking. In particular, when you're investing yourself in a business. Yeah, there's no harder lesson than when you're part of a management team that's come through this sort of activity. You're invested in the business yourself. You're not just there as an employee, or you're not there as someone running a program, or as a consultant coming in, or a practice coming in to do this for a business. When it's your business, and you can see that the impact that these sorts of mistakes have, it is a stark wake up call. It is a stark moment. It really is.
Yeah. What, I mean, just from listening to you speak, and I want to come into a little bit more personal, because we come into near the end of the hour, and it's just gone so quick, John, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I want to talk a little bit about what comes across for me quite evidently is the, and I'm glad you mentioned about what do you call it, punching or pumping the sunshine, or what do you call
Pumping
that?
sunshine.
Pumping sunshine. I think that as an integration practitioner, specialist, or whatever it is, however you position yourself, if you're not enthusiastic, if you don't have some sort of passion for what you're doing, if you don't have the energy, everything is made up of energy. If you think about, if you look at physics and all that kind of thing, without the right kind of energy, passion, drive, and enthusiasm, how on earth are you going to bring people along with you? It's just impossible. I would rather err on that side than be Mr. Pessimist, and everyone around you is like, oh hell, it's just not going to work, and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with being passionate, but I think it's a realistic passion, if I may say so, and it's also one that's been tempered with the realities of the environment, of the world, and so on. And just before we go onto a few personal things, there was one thing that just came to my mind briefly. You spoke about the AIM and the listing, the IPO, and then going back to private. You want to just expand a bit on that, and then we can quickly finish off on your on your personal.
It was a very short. It was a very short sort of a project. I was asked to go in and basically for the private equity investor to realize savings, to actually effect another transaction. And so we had to take back, I think it was around about sort of 8% out of the cost base, and improve the profitability of the business. So, but the business owners decided to actually engage with an IPO and head for it, and successfully did so. Got themselves listed on the AIM. Very, very successful. Well, they raised far in excess of what they were expecting, and it was a really, really good outcome for them. But in that cycle of, I'm still in touch with some people that operate in the business. It's some years ago now, but in that cycle of what we, and everybody has seen these cycles, and the management team, I think post-COVID, I dare say, Arena, being a massive event business across numerous geographies across the world, would have suffered quite badly during COVID. But thankfully they came through it, as all of those event businesses have suffered, and we can see the hospitality industry, we can see the event business coming through that. We can see it still, in some semblance of recovery. But I think, the management team, they took the opportunity to raise funding and bring the business back into ownership from the AIM. And you see that cycle. You see that in one of the businesses that I was involved with, which was Enterprise. Well before I joined the business, it had been listed on the AIM, and the management team managed to effect a buyback, an NBO, with funding from, I think it was 3i at the time. At the same time, they did a £450 million acquisition. Imagine that. Imagine that. But imagine that.
Well, double
So,
whammy.
bring the business back from the AIM, raise funding for that, and acquire a £450 million business. So,
unbelievable. And then there we go, John. Let's fix that. Let's. I just want to come onto yourself, John. If I, for me, there are a number of attributes that make a really good M&A slash, post acquisition or post integration practitioner. Someone who's really good at business, often a generalist and a specialist at the same time. Multiple skills, multiple instances of go in and be Mr. Fix-It. I think that's often when you learn the most. In times in my own career, the best learning I've had, and I've told many of the and I've instituted that in many companies that I own as well, is what I think the best way to learn something is to experience it or teach it. And I think because you've been in it, I think you just naturally just learn. I think it's like life lessons. There's no replacement. You can't read a book for what you do. But I want to talk about sort of John Farrell. So how do you differentiate yourself? Because if I look at the market for your skill set, and the people are around there, around that you would compete against potentially for work and for promoting yourself, your career, etc., etc. Why you as opposed to the other guy to take on that project? How would you be able to? Is that a curveball? Would you be able to differentiate? Why are you different and unique as opposed to sort of what else is out there?
That's a really good question. And I dare say it's it's one of those ones that demands a certain element of self-examination, doesn't it? So, like you said, I think for a huge number of practitioners to do what we've done, and they've just ended up there. Yeah, they've learned all the way through. They've been thrown in at the deep end, and they either love it or they don't. Yeah, you either like doing this or you think, what, that's not for me. I don't want to do it anymore. I'm going to go back into doing what I'm doing, commercial operations, whatever. I think for me, what differentiates is the fact that having been in businesses and seen where what seemingly are small problems develop further down the line, and having been in businesses where I'm not just a practitioner coming in to do this. I'm actually part of this business. This is my business. These are our people. This is our strategy, and driving that forward and understanding if this doesn't happen well, then it will completely distract the management team away from the strategy. So the way I always put it when we're talking about Popping Sunshine Rays, other things is, if we don't get that right, it stops us doing all this fantastic stuff over here. Yeah. And that's the difference, is that actually there are lots of practitioners out there, great people, great practitioners. What differentiates me is that actually it's the execution side of it. We get it executed, we get the plan executed, but we are not completely, we're agile as well. Yeah. So that level of agility allows you to move, as you said earlier on. You've got to be able to actually, through a lot of ambiguity, find a route through complex issues, complex problems, relate that to the business, and actually relate that to how your plan is going to perform and how that executing that plan is going to impact that business and impact the outcome. So I've been on the receiving end of good integrations. I've been on the receiving end of bad integrations. I've been involved in, I've delivered some really good ones. I've delivered some average ones. I won't say I've ever delivered a bad one that's not gone really well. But, it's almost like, I think it was a German colleague of mine that said that if you're going to build your own house, make sure you build one for someone you don't like very much first, and then build one for your friend, and then build your own. So, your friend will be very forgiving. You can forget about the first one. But that experience on the way through, we've all got scars on our back where commercially or whatever else, or we bought a quiet business. You've got your own businesses, Dudley, I have my own. We've all got the scars on our back where it hasn't gone well. I think the biggest difference for me is I've seen how that impacts people directly, having had to rescue a business and go in and not just turn it around, but rescue a business in the past. You get becomes very, very personal when you're actually thinking there's 500-600 people here who are relying on this business for their income and to feed their families and pay their mortgages. Yeah.
Mm.
And that's the difference. That, I think, that level of personalization, you can't actually do too much of it because you end up with a whole raft of empathy fatigue, like what I call it. But you have to actually make sure that you recognize the impact of this, and the impact of this is with people. And if those people aren't bought into it, you won't succeed. So
yeah, I love that. I mean, that's very well explained. I mean, I'm loving that. So it becomes a we and an us challenge. Let's do this together. We sit on the same side of the fence, and we get this done together, as opposed to a you problem. And I'll come in and see what I can do, but it's up to you, kind of thing. And I think that definitely is a differentiator, and that's special. And I want to thank you for that, and sorry for the curveball, but I thought it would be really useful to get that. John, just one last question on the personal side. So how do you keep yourself sane? How do you balance? Is there such a thing? How do you keep yourself at least at some sort of normality, if there is such a thing?
who said I'm sane and who says I'm not? Yeah, I mean, family. Yeah. We're not all lucky enough to have family. I am, my wife is fantastic. My kids keep me busy. We've got huge interest in sports in our house and so on, with rugby in particular. And you've always got that family dynamic to actually keep you grounded and understand why you're doing these things in the first place. I love, going out to socialize with people. Everybody loves that. But every so often I'll pick that, or to the other side, I'll pick up that saxophone and I'll play a fairly morose tune. That can be my meditation. So you've got to have some release. You have to have some form of outlet. All too often, you see in business that people's outlet in the past has been, when they're involved in this sort of activity, it can be 18, 20-hour days, and you don't get that out. People, when you're coming into a particularly big deal, that you're having to integrate, it's really intense. It really is. I mean, let's not underestimate that or understate it. It is hugely intense. That intensity can carry on for 12 months longer if you're not careful. So it's not just really about you making sure that you're getting time out and decent time out and so on. And that's been difficult over the last, I'd say, 3 years with COVID. People taking holidays, getting that release, getting engagement with people. I'm a huge people person, so engaging with other people and so on in ways that are face to face. That has really impacted people's mental health quite dramatically. And that's, I'm stating the obvious because we see it everywhere. But in this particular scenario where these things are so intense, you lose the opportunity to get into rooms and brainstorm and so on. So I'm glad we're getting back to that. But yeah, I have, my wife's a physiotherapist and I'm probably her worst advocate because, I've had bad backs in the past that she's helped me manage and so on, but I'm not at a high fitness, so she, I could be far fitter than I am and do more. Everyone can do more than they should do. But yeah, you've got to have those releases, Dudley. I mean, I try and blow on that sax. The sax is next to a rowing machine that hardly gets used. Yeah, there's lots of stuff that, and I've got certain interests and hobbies and so on. What you need to have those releases to keep your head right, and keep away from, partying and various other things. I'm far too old for that now. The young people that are coming through, let them crack on with that. They can
work hard, play hard,
with playing hard as well. Yeah, I've done all that. No longer.
I'm just picturing you on the rowing machine and playing your sax at the same time. That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
On the next episode, we have to wrap it up. I'm loving the episode, and we're John. on the next episode, you're going to need to share your journey around your saxophone, how that is important, in your life and your life story. But unfortunately, we come to the end of this episode, so let's leave that as a cliffhanger. But it's a fascinating story in terms of how you got into it, and in terms of your world travels because of that saxophone skill of yours. Anyway, let's leave it at that. John, thank you very, very much. Any last golden nuggets, last word of wisdom you want to leave before we close?
Just, keep whenever we can, we need to keep fun in it. It can be, hugely intense. But really that satisfaction from getting these things across the line, that satisfaction from actually making things right, fixing things and so on, getting things done, it's, it shouldn't let anything overtake the fact that we can do this and it can be fun. This can be, it can be a really enjoyable experience for people on the way through. And that's what we should be aiming for.
Love it. Love it. John, stay on the line. I just want to say goodbye to our audience, and then I'll be back with you. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today on our latest episode of 100 Days and Beyond, where we deal with and we speak to and we engage with the individuals out there in the trenches and in so many different industries. And those of the audience that have managed to catch a few of the earlier episodes, you're probably seeing a trend in terms of the skills, attributes, experiences. But what's wildly different often are the industries and even the approaches, although there are commonalities amongst practitioners in mergers and acquisitions, especially on the post-acquisition or post-merger people. If you'd like to know more about John and John's contact details, it's on LinkedIn. I'm sure John would welcome anybody to contact him, and probably just drop him a message. The same goes for all our other guests. Thank you very much for joining us. As I mentioned before, the post-acquisition or post-merger integration world is made up of what I call the unsung heroes, the guys that get, and then the girls that get things done behind the scenes. Once the deal has been struck, is to remember why the deal was done in the first place, and then to make things happen while there are, I would say, curveballs, like I threw one at John earlier, but there are curveballs coming at you all the time. It's to build an instinct, a methodology and a plan as early as possible, and then to roll out and implement that plan. Thank you very much, 100 Days and Beyond, for joining us. All the best to our audience. All the best to you, John. Thank you so much for joining us. And please join us on our next episode of 100 Days and Beyond, the podcast specifically designed for business people, M&A professionals and practitioners, post-merger or post-acquisition integration practitioners, and even those that are learning or wanting to get into this industry, or if you are expecting or receiving on the receiving end of an acquisition and you don't know how to deal with it. Meet the real people, meet the people who are there, and you can see, based on John's experience, very, very much real people, and they are there to do it. For John, it's definitely in a fun way, and I love that about what he said. Thank you very much again. See you on our next episode, and goodbye. Hi everybody, this is Dudley again, and if you need help with a future or existing post-merger integration, I want to invite you to arrange a free, no obligation meeting with us. During the meeting, we'll find out exactly what you need, what your challenges are, and we'll explain how our unique PMI slipstream method can help you. Simply call us or visit mergerintegration.co.uk. That's mergerintegration.co.uk, or come to our website, skillfulpursuit.com.